Well, good afternoon and welcome to the final installation of the Critical Legal AI Literacy Speaker Series. Unfortunately, our original speaker was unable to join us today, but we're so honored to have Dr. Clifford Anderson speak to us about the challenges of synthetic media. Dr. Anderson is the director of the Divinity Library at Yale University. Previously, he served as director of digital research at the Center for Theological Inquiry and chief digital strategist at Vanderbilt University Library. He's the author of, among other books, Artificial Intelligence for Academic Libraries. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a great opportunity to be able to speak with you, and especially since I'll be covering some territory towards the end that's in the legal area, where I'm definitely not an expert. I'm going to just love to have this be interactive and maybe have some dialogue about these issues and learn from you as well. So I do want to just present informally. So if we're coming across a topic and you want to interject and ask a question, I'm happy to do that. And then I hope that we'll leave plenty of time at the end for conversation. So this is a topic that I've been working on for a while, and I've tried to bring it up to where we are now, but it's also going to cover some of the territory that we've traveled through to get to the point where synthetic media is really competing with our sense of what is real. I mean, this is every time you do a talk like this, and I think it's now become more and more common knowledge that a lot of these video generators are able to create synthetic media that's practically indistinguishable from what the actual media might portray in the real world. It just raises a lot of questions about how it's going to affect and warp our sense of reality going forward. So, with that in mind, let's just sort of start, and I'll share some of the goals of this talk. So, the first thing that I want to do is just talk about what deepfakes are in sort of their myriad of forms. So we get a sense of like the range of deepfakes. Then I want to dive a little bit more into sort of the technical realm. And so I want to talk about the difference between generative adversarial networks, which have been the way that people created deepfakes. And you're going to see this term in the literature a lot if you're doing research on deepfakes, sometimes shortened as GANs, and diffusion models. And diffusion models tend to be the way that people create deepfakes for the most part now, and we'll talk about some of the differences there. And then I'll get to some lines of defense that people use to safeguard against digital media. And we can talk about sort of the ways in which we're trying to protect our own sense of what's real, and whether that's going to be a winning or losing battle. So let's just start by asking the question, like, what are deepfakes? So an easy, sort of simple definition of this would be to say that deepfakes are fictionalized representations of reality produced by deep neural networks. So, one thing that we might want to say is that it's not actually the case that this is totally brand new. I mean, you just have to go to a movie to know that like people are able to create environments that show fictional scenarios that look real, right? I mean, that's not that new. But the deepfake idea is that you're using deep neural networks, the same type of neural networks that power, for example, large language models, to be able to produce these much more easily and much more quickly, and they put them into hands of a lot more people. We'll talk about that in a minute. But, this idea of using media to reshape reality, certainly a very old one. We have this quote from George Orwell that I feel like he's cited a lot these days. Every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day, minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists apart from or except an endless present in which the party is always right. This idea that, if you kind of reach this inflection point, we can just take everything that's historical and just constantly remix it so that we're just living in an eternal present that reflects, whatever point of view the creators wanted to reflect. That's sort of the nightmare scenario. But, there's been attempts in that direction for a long time. The idea of cheap fakes, which is a term that you'll see out there sometime in the literature, are people using, very sort of rudimentary means. They're not using high technologies. They're simply like editing photographs. And for example, this is a book called The Commissar Vanishes, The Falsification of Photographs in Art in Stalin's Russia. And, as people were disappeared, they disappeared from the record as well. This poor fellow on the right had a falling out and was gone. So, that's been around for a while. But I think that the thing that makes people nervous is that now that can happen, as I said, at scale and with a much greater velocity. You see here this this note that Indian voters are being bombarded with millions of deepfakes, and it's being done with the awareness of political candidates. So you can generate an image of you and speaking to a particular issue, send it out, customize it for whatever information you have about the people you're sending it to, and then you've got your candidate speaking directly to an issue that concerns a particular segment of the voting population. That's, I think, the thing that makes people really nervous about these technologies. Of course, it's not the real reason. They haven't bloomed. I think everybody's worried about the political side of things, but where deepfakes have taken hold is on social media and things like TikTok. This is, I think, one of the breakthrough ones. It was done a few years ago where, Tom Cruise, as far as I know, not on TikTok, and yet an impersonator if you watch these videos, they're just amazingly realistic. Put Tom Cruise on TikTok and started making videos. Now, this particular creator, was upfront about the fact that these were synthetic media, but when you watch them, it's like, wow, that really seems like Tom Cruise. And that's kind of where they're taking off. And if you want to just test your own sense of whether you're good at generating or detecting these fakes, a lot of people, and I don't know, this may have changed. A year or so, 2 years ago, people would say, well, I can tell the difference between a deepfake or something that's real. And so there was an experiment called Detect Fakes at Northwestern School of Management that just gave people a series of photographs, and I think I've got the link here, we can send this out afterwards, or you can just Google it, and test your own intuition about what's fake or real. And it turns out that people really aren't as good as they think. They still have strong confidence across the board that they can detect deepfakes, but their actual ability, in terms of their accuracy to do it, you can see here, their confidence sort of stays, it wanes a little bit here, but they're not able to really systematically decide whether or not something is fake or not. So, there's some that people are sure about, and then there are others that they're less sure about, but people are generally not as good at detecting deepfakes as they think they are. So, let me just pause there. That's just an introduction to the topic. And I want to now move into the technologies. Okay, so where is all this technology coming from? Well, we've heard about, and we're going to talk about some of the companies that are developing it, but a lot of it is actually being shared out in open source on a particular site called Hugging Face. How many of you have heard of Hugging Face? So we've got a couple here. So Hugging Face is a site. It's really where the open source machine learning and AI movement has its central hub. And so when you hear about, for example, new models being released, like Quinn or whatever, they are being released generally on Hugging Face. And so you'll be able to go there and use those models. People sometimes set up demonstration sites. They share what are called the weights of the models. And it's an area where, if you want to sort of see what's happening most recently, this is probably the best place to look. It's not necessarily always at this state of the art. The for-profit companies which hold their models back and keep them private, apart from certain instances like Meta that releases on Hugging Face, so does Microsoft. But the ones, like OpenAI, they may be ahead in what are called the leaderboards, where they measure the effectiveness, but a lot of the open source models where the actual sort of like really quick innovations taking place are on Hugging Face. And so you can find tools there to create deepfakes of all kinds. This is Jonathan Edwards. And of course, at the Divinity School, Jonathan Edwards, we looked at, I guess the rest of Yale, Jonathan Edwards College, you're right. So, so you can find tools, for example, to easily edit expressions. Some of this it's just built into like all of our tools, right? So like, it's almost nothing special. You can go on and just find a tool that's like, a commercial image generator or editor, and it will allow you to edit expressions. But here's Jonathan Edwards winking. You can do face swaps. This is my self-portrait as Jonathan Edwards. Face swaps was an area where deepfakes really took hold. People would swap in each other's faces and animate people in scenarios that they might have taken from a film clip, but they put themselves in the clip or somebody else. And then there are tools that this is one that was really popular for a while called Runway. I don't know if anyone's used that. I think it's a startup that came out of NYU. And anyway, it was one of the first video editors that would allow you to use video deepfakes. And so we at the Divinity School have been thinking about, okay, are there ways in which we can use these deepfakes for good? This is a project that we were working on where, we took a portrait of Jonathan Edwards, and we're developing a museum exhibit where we have a book by Edwards, and then we have an accompanying letter that Edwards wrote to his wife Sarah, and then in our display case we have a screen that then has Jonathan Edwards reading this letter. We thought about this. I think it's this kind of area of museum informatics, where you're thinking about how to, communicate information about art or history to the general public that's just coming through. Deepfakes have sort of also become a method there, but there are a lot of ethical questions you have to think through. For example, nobody knows what Jonathan Edwards sounded like. So you're going to have to make up a voice for Jonathan Edwards. You might have a description. We have some descriptions that he had a high, somewhat squeaky voice. But the thing is, what does that sound like? And what does the regional accent in New England sound like, in the late 18th century? So we don't really know. Some people have recreated it. We came across someone who was a voice actor that actually did a very good job of recreating it, and we could have cloned that person's productions, but we wrote to him and said, what do you think about that? And he said, absolutely not. It's my personal IP. Whether or not that would be or not from a legal standpoint, but he certainly considered it that way. And so we said, okay, we're not going to use it. We'll just, we'll use a generic voice clone. But I think that anytime you do one of these deepfakes, and I think Robin Williams has been in the news recently because people keep making deepfakes of Robin Williams and then sending it to his family, thinking that this is a nice thing to do, and they put out a plea please don't do this anymore. It's disrespecting my father's legacy. We're going to come back to that legacy issue in a minute. But so anyway, we tried to do this through various techniques and. That we use in Hugging Face. We just explored a lot of different ways of using some of these tools. So that's something that we've been actively exploring and thinking that we may want to use more of, but we're, again, as I say, thinking through all the issues related to it. Okay, so now let's dive into the actual tech part of this. So as I said, deepfakes, the term really started appearing in the 2010s, and it followed on this work by a guy named Ian Goodfellow, who was a researcher, doctoral student. The kind of legend is he was out at a bar one night and he was kind of thinking with a friend about how to work on some machine learning processes, and he came up with this idea of a generative adversarial network, or generative adversarial nets, he calls it here. And the basic idea behind that is that you create two distinct processes. One is going to be a generator, and the other is going to be a discriminator. So here's the discriminator, here's the generator, and you're going to take some set of real images and sample from them, and the generator is going to create some fake images and sample from them, and then randomly the discriminator will be sent either one of the sampled real images or one of the sampled fake images, and then asked to say whether it's, it's doing the same thing that, that website that I talked to you about does, but can you reliably detect that it's a deepfake or not? So when you start off this process, the generator will generate images, the discriminator will be nearly 100% just saying that's fake, that's fake, that's fake, whenever it is fake. But whenever the generator gets information from the discriminator that it lost, and so something was wrong with its deepfake, it passes that back as information to the generator so the generator can learn. And so the idea is that over time, these two machine learning processes, which are adversarial, one is trying to defeat the other, the discriminator is trying to figure out what's true and what's false, the generator is trying to produce images that can't be reliably detected as true or false, that they'll come into an equilibrium where it's just 50-50 whether it detects it as fake or not fake when it's one or the other. And at that point, you've got images that, at least in theory, are indistinguishable from any kind of machine learning technique from what's real. So that's how a GAN works. Any question about that before we move on? Clear enough? Okay. The reason I want to move on is that we don't necessarily use GANs any longer. Since 2021, here's a paper that came out of OpenAI, and the title of the paper is Diffusion Models Beat GANs on Image Synthesis. So that begs the question, what are we talking about when we're talking about a diffusion model? So a diffusion model starts with Gaussian noise, just basically random noise, and then it tries to iterate from that noise up to an image. How does it do that? Well, here's the equation. It's a partial differential equation. You don't need to worry about the details of this, except to say that it uses two parts, basically. It looks at the drift, and then it adds a little bit of noise each iteration. So basically, what it does is, at each step, it tries to approximate something that's in its data set of images. But if it just had the data set, then every time it would just reproduce one of the images that it had in its underlying data model. So every time it tries to iterate towards one of these images, moving from that pure noise to something that it knows is an image that it's trying to replicate, it adds a little bit of new noise into its process, and that's why it's able to create something that never existed before. So the drift is towards one of the images that you ask it for, but the diffusion just keeps adding new noise into each step so that you get something that's not just reproducing what had been there before, but creating something that's new and novel. Yeah?
Data from existing data.
No, it's just random perturbations, basically. So at each step, it's having to overcome those perturbations and then fill in what it thinks the image should look like in those perturbated areas. And so you can sort of see how this process would work. You give it a prompt here. Here's a cute and adorable bunny with huge clear eyes holding a bunch of flowers in the style of a cute Pixar character. We're going to talk about how it knows to find an image that can guide it towards that. So it gets an image that sort of guides it to the right place, and then it repeats this process. Here it says 24 times, where it keeps trying to get something that looks like a cute bunny, and then it fills in the details. So I'm sure that some of you have used these image generators, and you've seen it kind of go from a low-res version to a high-res version. Have you seen that process, if you've used Midjourney or something? So that's what's happening in the background. that's why it kind of looks all fuzzy and diffuse at first, and then it sort of snaps until it gets to be crystal clear. So that's why it's called a diffusion process. And this process, because it's able to train on such huge amounts of data, just like LLMs are, has a lot more sort of background data to work with than the GAN model does. The GAN model, that reaches equilibrium much more quickly, and so it's not able to reach the kind of heights of, actual, trueness to reality that you get with diffusion models. So the part that I kind of waved my hand over, which is this part, well, how does it know to turn this prompt into something that looks like an image? That's another technology that OpenAI created. So, we could be happy or unhappy with the way that OpenAI is working as a company, but they did create a lot of these technologies. And that's something called clip embeddings. And it's a really interesting idea. It's a paper they published in 2021. And the idea was, well, what does data look like, for a machine learning process? It's basically just a high-dimensional space with lots and lots of data points, right? So like a large language model works this way. It works with something called a word embedding. And these embeddings basically are capturing the way that words co-occur in the language that we use. So, if I say like, I've got a dog at home, the question you might be is like, what kind of dog, or something like that. So these words co-occur a lot, just the natural patterns that we have in speech. And so these embeddings capture those co-occurrences. But the question is, well, what if we took images that had labels and we then found where the images co-occur? So like, for example, if I'm asking about dogs, you're likely to show me pictures of dogs. Like, if that's you're talking about dogs on social media, you're going to show a picture of a dog. You're not going to show a picture of like a house or an airplane or something like that. So those are going to be further away in that embedding space. So the idea that OpenAI had is, since this is all just linear algebra behind the scenes, and we're just turning this into data, we don't have to just work with words. We can also embed those images into that space and be able to then go from a text to an image that falls into sort of the same latent space within the embedding, if that makes sense at a high level. So that's why you're able to actually type in a text and get an image that comes out looking something like you might expect that text to represent. And so diffusion models, as I say, have taken over. These may be a little bit older slides because I think each one of these now is like a step up. We're certainly on DALL-E 3. But there are many, many models now that are working with diffusion. And just, this continues to be an area in which people are doing some interesting work in mathematics to just make this easier. One thing that you may hear about is a paper that came out in 2021 called LoRA, Low Rank Adaptation. And the idea here is that you can, when you want to fine-tune these models, so let's say you've got a model that produces images, but you want it to reliably produce images about a certain type of something. Typically, what people want to produce images about is like, a certain type of person. So you want to be able to reliably put yourself or put some product into situations. You want it to look that way every time. You don't want to have to kind of guess. Like if you say say you're selling BMWs and you want to say okay, put a BMW on a mountain range looking majestic. You want to make sure that it's like your latest model BMW that's represented and not like a Toyota, right? So these clip models are not accurate enough to do that. So you need to fine tune your model. And in order to fine tune it, typically before that, you would have to fine tune hundreds of millions of parameters, billions of parameters. And so this technique called low rank adaptation provides a way to actually just take a subset of those parameters, do the fine tuning, and still accomplish your goal. And so that makes it possible for you to put yourself, routinely in situations. Here's, I don't know if it looks like me or not, but it's me walking down the street, probably in New York, that wearing clothes, or that none of this is anything that I generated, it knows what I looked like because I fed it a few photographs, I fine-tuned it, and using this LoRa technique, now I can put myself in all kinds of situations. You notice the dog, though. Like, I do have a dog, and it's a Jack Russell Terrier, so it's pretty close. But what is this? What is this part? Like, that's a little bit worrisome because you don't usually connect anything to a dog's behind like that. So, so there's still some tells in these images. And where we are now, I think we've really reached some pretty insane heights. How many of you have used Sora 2? Do you want to talk about that?
It's incredible. It's incredible. It's fast, highly capable, just from my experience using other applications. And the videos are hyper realistic.
Yeah. It's we're getting to the point where it's, as I say, very indistinguishable. Of course, if you pick something that's like a scenario that could never happen in real life, you'll know it. And they're building a social network out of this, essentially. So I don't know, you have to get an invitation to get into Sora right now, Sora 2. But basically, they're trying to do a synthetic media social network. So everybody shares their creations, and you just scroll endlessly through lots of videos. The other one that's out there, which is sort of on the image side, is I love it's Gemini 2.5 Flash, but it's known as Nano Banana. And the funny thing about this is, these are really serious technologies, but the code names are humorous. So Nano Banana is open for anyone to use, and it's the state of the art from Google, which I think is at the top of the leaderboards. So give that one a try. They've just been building it into everything. So I don't know if any of you have used Notebook LM, I think is what it's called. You can put in your notes and create podcasts and stuff. So they just integrated Nano Banana into that, so you can make short videos about your topic using these image generators. We'll see where this goes, but in any case, it's definitely not stopped in terms of the innovation side. So that leads us to this question of the persistence of digital memory. Like many of you, at some point, you kind of have to deal with stuff that's built up in your house. And unfortunately, my father passed away just about in the spring, and so I've got the sad duty of going through and cleaning up the house. And there are lots of boxes of photographs from the 70s, the 80s, and it's really kind of nice to be able to see think about where that was or who these people were. But one question I don't have to worry about was this real? I don't have to have the additional question of did this actually happen? I don't necessarily know who's in the image or where it was, but I know that it's some kind of depiction of something that, obviously a photographic representation of something that actually happened. But what happens when, we come back to that Orwellian worry, when these technologies are just constantly reshaping our past, so that people are just taking large collections of media, more of which is stored. If you had to sort of go through your parents' house 20, 30 years from now, you may be working with hard drives or stored in the cloud or whatever. So and that media isn't as fixed as photographs were in the 1970s. So what happens when we can just constantly remix? This book by Abby Smith Rumsey deals with that topic, and she basically says, we're living in this environment in which we have had thousands of years of human history, and right now we have a display at the Divinity School. You're welcome to come see it on our incunables. These are the earliest printed books. I know you have a wonderful collection here, but we've got technologies that have fixed things in print or in writing of some sort that go back thousands of years. And just now we're sort of involved in an experiment in which everything's digital and can be rewritten practically without being noticeable. There are some techniques to notice it. And I think what Rumsey says about this is, the growing body of shared knowledge and know-how decisively shapes our fate as a species, distinct from all others. Over generations, as we perfected the technologies of recording and created more resilient and compact media to hold our knowledge, we've gained dominion over the planet. Our culture and technologies are the ultimate power tool. enabling adaptive strategies that far outpace the strictly biological evolution other species must make do with. Yet quite abruptly and without warning, at the beginning of the 21st century, we embarked on a vast natural experiment, rendering obsolete our 40,000-year project to cheat death by using objects to hold the contents of our minds. You know, not to put too much of a fine point on it, but I mean, it is a worry, especially when we're thinking about the historical record. And I think one thing that we should maybe keep our eye on are things like the potential for deepfake virus, something that goes in and maybe infects one of your systems where you're holding images or text and just suddenly start changing things. I thought about this because of one of your professor's books here, Scott Shapiro's book on the dark history of the information age. I thought, well, it's a really good way to think about AI, which is like, how can people abuse AI, and what could they potentially do with it? And that brought me back to my thinking about my own work as a librarian. Back at Vanderbilt, I used to be in charge of something called the Vanderbilt Television News Archive. It was started in 1968 to preserve television news. And at that time, the networks didn't retain their broadcasts. They would tape them, but then they would use those same tapes to just re-record the next night's broadcast. So if you heard something on the TV news and you wanted to check your source, there was no way to do that. So Vanderbilt started in 1968. Whole long, interesting legal story there, because we were sued in 1972 by CBS, but that's a different story. But I thought, okay, so now we've moved everything off of tape. It's all digital. It's all in the cloud. It's all being stored in the AWS cloud. What if someone made a virus that just went in and started changing little bits and pieces of history? Maybe something just small, like something about the way that, we all have this Mandela effect where, we think something happened one way, but actually, people thought Mandela died in prison, but of course, he was first president of the new South African, there's like the Berenstain Bears is another one. Everyone thinks it's like Berenstein, not Stain, or whatever the spelling is. And so people think history has been changed. But what if you just took one of those cultural prejudices and actually changed history whenever it was referred to? Then you might think you were losing your mind if you remembered it differently. So, it's worrisome. And it's worrisome in particular as you start generating pictures of yourself in places you've never been, doing things you've never done. This is a subtle temptation, and I'm sure you've done the same thing that I have. So I was in Chicago. I was at the Art Institute of Chicago. I asked my son to take a picture of me standing in front of this nice Art Institute of Chicago wall. And then there's a tourist there looking at it. I was like, well, that ruined the picture because, I've got this person I don't want in the photo. So what did? I just used the Google Magic eraser, erase that person, and I've got a beautiful photo of myself. I thought, oh, that's great. And I shared that on social media. I did click the box, is this AI generated? Because I thought, okay, I have some responsibility there. Nevertheless, there's a photo of me and I've erased someone. And I think that just happens routinely. But, beyond this, it's just as easy not to take the vacation at all. Just put myself in front of the Art Institute of Chicago, take a picture, put it on social media, say, wonderful weekend seeing this exhibit. Nobody would know the difference. The technology is certainly pretty indistinguishable. So since personal memory is, when you look back at these photographs, as you grow older, the distinction in your own life between what was real and what was fake can fade. It's a dangerous thing that we're entering into. So just to close, I want to just talk very briefly about some countermeasures. So there are technologies now that are out there that you can purchase that will say that they can detect deepfakes. This is an arms race, of course, because as the deepfakes get better, these technologies have to keep up with it, and every new generation is one that they have to test all their models on, and they may not be able to detect them. There are people talking about using blockchain to do this, and I think some of this has actually been introduced. So in the Sora videos, there are not just watermarks that you can see, but there are watermarks underlying in the code. And if you ask if it's a deepfake, that watermark is there, and if you try to remove it, you're going to destroy the video itself. At least that's the theory. There is legislation. You probably know a lot more than I do. This is a little bit behind the times, but there's constant attempts to legislate this. It's really, really difficult, though, because it runs up against First Amendment issues. And, we wouldn't want to say, like, you can't make media that, is creative in this sense, like, but how to draw the lines. Some people maybe say, like, let's use intellectual property. Obviously, copyright won't do. This is an interesting piece. Was the first AI-generated comic book that the Copyright Office issued a copyright for, and then as soon as the author said it was AI-generated, they rescinded that copyright, and then there was a negotiation, and they ended up saying the artwork can't be copyrighted, but the text that the author used could be. So there's partial copyright on this, but nevertheless, copyright probably won't do it for us in terms of these deep fakes. Maybe right of publicity, something like that. I think people are exploring that. And then there are other people that just say, well, maybe the way to do this is just to stop relying so much on images. It's not to say that there haven't been periods in our history, and of course at the Divinity School we're very aware of them, where people felt like images were misleading them. One of the big issues in the Reformation was whether the images that people saw in churches represented the Bible and the Christian tradition accurately. And during these iconoclastic furies that took place in the 1600s, they just tore out the images and said, we're not going to have any more images because they're all unreliable. Could we see something like that happen today? Well, there are people like Jaron Lanier that are saying, like, just delete your social media. You'll be a lot safer off if you didn't have it. And I've written some on maybe the idea of empathy can guide us through, if you want to see my paper on that. That's it. There's some further reading. If you want to kind of jump into this, Joy Bulamwini's book on unmasking AI is really great on talking about problems with these image models. Lena Schick has this book on deepfakes. And Fei Li is the leading researcher in this area. She's also just published a book on sort of how we got to where we are. So with that, let me stop there. I hope we still have time for questions, but thanks for your attention.